Okay, I'm now recording the session, so we can go ahead and get started. Yes, my cat is, one of my cats is very vocal. And she wants something, but I'm not sure what it is. Okay, I thought that today it would be a good idea to review a little bit of what happened last week. I saw all of the messages that went across on Waldo Support, and I monitored the support center to see what kinds of reports you were all sending in. And if you recall, after the point release was installed Wednesday night, on Thursday, everything seemed to just sort of fall apart. And it happened differently at each of your libraries, I'm certain. And I was really concerned about it, so I wanted to get LibLime's take on what happened and what it took for them to figure out what was going on. So I'm going to display to you now an email that I got from Patrick, and you can read it as I talk, or you can just wait and I'll send this out to the mailing list later. But instead of Patrick trying to tell me exactly what it was that Clay told him, he just sent me Clay's response. And I noticed in some of your support center, on some of your support center requests, that the answer that you were getting was that it was a database issue, that the database server was overloaded or something like that. And that's why Clay starts out by saying that it wasn't a database issue. The actual problem that it ended up being is that it was, in fact, a code error. And the code error that was getting caught was one that came from the cataloging editor. Every time that a record is edited in the cataloging editor, any of the headings fields are checked against the authority file that is kept for your database. And if an entry isn't found in the authority database, it's supposed to write it into the database as a system supplied authority, just to let you know that that heading has already been used. Well, what happened is that the patch that was wrong ended up getting the whole service stuck in an infinite loop. And in that case, what happened is that one infinite loop started, and as it kept trying to fulfill the request, it kept slowing down the response time for other libraries trying to access the same kind of service. Ben, did you have something? No, I was echoing to myself, I guess. So that was the beginning part of it. And in the second paragraph from Clay, he tells us that the request that actually started this whole cycle of infinite loops happening was that a cataloger edited a bib that caused an RCN lookup. And since the record wasn't there, and since the code thought that it should be there, it kept trying to find that heading over and over and over again. Now, if you were not experiencing some of those problems, it's likely that you were hitting a different piece of the server, and you weren't, you just weren't trying to use the same kind of resources. But as more requests started, it kept eventually skyrocketing, and eventually it would bring the server down. So what they did in tracking it down is that first they thought that it was the SQL server that was causing the problem, and they were explaining that they thought that it was some reports that some libraries had started that were long-running queries, and that they just weren't they were just stopping everything up, but in fact that was not the case. And they finally discovered and realized that it wasn't the queries, but a lot of very, very short-running queries. Once they saw what was happening, they were able to quickly determine what the issue was, and they were able to fix it. And as he says, it was literally changing a single line of code. So it was, in fact, something that happened while libraries were working, but it was not any of your fault. You were using the system as you expected to use the system, and because of that, you were brought into something that nobody expected. The fix itself that had been put in was very difficult to test in the environment that LibLime has to test in. And that's partly because they don't have infinite or a lot of people that can go in and test at the same time and try to magically hit the same kind of combination of requests that come in from all of the different libraries to the servers during a regular day of activity. So no matter how long they had tested or how long we had tested in the sandbox, it's unlikely that we would have ever run across this in our testing. So it's something that we were unlikely that we would have found it ahead of time. So the fact that you all were very diligent and started sending out messages as soon as this slowdown started was a very good thing. And the fact that you were seeing problems in different areas actually made it, gave them clues and hints on where they needed to look for what was going on. And I also wanted to let you know that I'm very glad that you started sending in support center requests as quickly as you could, because I think that helped get the problem resolved. Patrick did tell me in the call that this was not a widespread problem across all libraries. He said the server that was hit primarily by this problem was the one that most of the Waldo libraries are on. So, so not everybody in the whole LibLime universe had this problem. It just seemed to, or it just did, affect all of our libraries more than any of some of the others. So I wanted to let you know what it was that happened. Hopefully you had in your procedures, if you recognize that there was downtime, that you went into backup into the offline circulation mode so that you could continue to track your circulation transactions. And just in case you didn't do that, that I had the opportunity to remind you that that was a feature that you can use. I would encourage you that if something dramatic like this happens again in the future, that you would do the same thing that you did last Thursday and on Friday, because it took a while for the fix to get installed, and then of course it happened every now and again. But communicate with your colleagues in other libraries, let them know on the Waldo support mailing list that there is a detected problem, and if it continues to reoccur, send a request in right away. The other piece of advice that I can give you on this is that if something is not working and you hit reload and it still doesn't work, don't keep hitting reload, report it. Tell LibLime that there is something wrong, that the system is not responding to you. If you send in lots of requests, or if all of you send in a request, that's not going to overload them. It will immediately notify them that there is something wrong that needs to be looked at. In some cases, it's very likely that that your library may not even run into any of the problem, and you may be sitting watching the messages go by and saying, well, gee, it's working for us. Just be aware that it's just in the nature of software that it is all timing. So any questions about what happened? Any stories that you want to share on what happened and how your staff and how your patrons weathered the day last week? Yeah, that's right, Ben. But we don't want Warren to feel bad. Go ahead.
I had hoped when they put the scheduling and emailing in the reports that would help us determine which patrons were debarred and so forth. But although it says that I get messages, I've never actually received one in my email inbox.
Have you reported that to them?
No, I need to do that. I was just wondering if anybody else had the same experience. I did report something about that some time ago, but it is true that the scheduled reports are running. They're just not telling me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I've ever really asked to have the messages sent to me. And Anna's saying that they don't work for her either. And Ben says he had to switch on the email notifications. And I assume you've done that, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, I look in my messages in my record, my patron record, and it says that they've been sent. So I don't know.
Okay. Ben, that's in system preferences in staff client or in admin? Do you remember? In the patron record. Okay.
Hi, Becky. Yeah, I had to actually take a look at my patron record to make sure that that stuff was switched on. And when I did, I noticed that there are some other problems. Actually, I should let people know is that the message templates for at least reports can't be updated. I went in and I found that the URLs that he was spitting out, saying, you know, I'll click here to see your report or click here to see the report results, were incorrect. And so I opened up a ticket on that, and they were like, well, you can just go in and change them. So I did, but unfortunately the changes didn't take. So that ticket is still open.
Okay.
But I'm hoping that it's just a problem with the templates for the report notifications and not the templates for anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let me go back over here to the details. So yeah, here I have the messages and notifications set up over here. SQL reports. So check your patron user preferences, make sure that they're set up, and then also your messaging preferences to make sure that they're set the way that you want them to be. Because like here on the report completed, I've got the notifications turned on so that I get pop-up messages. I don't have it set up, as you can see, to do email addresses. So if you don't have the email addresses set up here, then you probably need to turn those on. One way to do that, if you have roles set up, and if you have more than just yourself running reports, is to add that into the role so that you don't have to go into each individual patron record in order to turn those on. Okay, you did yours in the dashboard. Yeah, that's the other ways that you can do it. Okay, so anything else about the downtime last week, about what to do, how to do it? And I will forward that email message to the mailing list so that you can read it, keep it, do whatever you want to with it, store it. But I think that that's something that I wanted to make sure that you all had the information for it, so that you didn't just think, well, they just, every time they do a point release into production, that it's going to cause problems like this. I don't think that's the case. I think this was an anomaly, and that we won't be seeing that again. Okay, were there other issues that had come up for you in the last couple of weeks that that you sent in a support center ticket and you haven't heard anything, or you received a reply that you're still going back and forth on and would like some information from other people?
Hi, Becky.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
So I sort of started jotting down a couple of ideas for enhancements, and one of them includes updating the report wizard. We found that the old way that you create an SQL report to get publication date and edition statement doesn't work anymore, but you still have those options to check off in the report wizard, even though they're not going to operate properly. The other thing, I've got two other things. I
noticed along those lines that the lost items report doesn't work either.
Yeah, that changed a little while ago. It's a much more complicated report now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're going to send those in, or you?
The thing about the reports wizard, like if you take a look at the tickets that I've submitted with my name on them, and there are many, it'll probably say something about pub date and edition not working in search queries. Oh, that's the one about the templates. Oh yeah, that's still open, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, cool. The other thing, and I'm hoping these are going to be minor, I'd really like to see a notes column for the issues that are listed on a details page in the serials module. You can put notes in for individual issues, but you can't see that there's a note present there until you drill down into the issue level.
Mm-hmm.
So even just a little indicator, an asterisk or a checkbox or whatever, indicating that there is a note would be really helpful. Even more helpful would be a column that actually has that note in it. Okay. And the last one, and I don't know if anybody else is going to really like this idea or not, but for the list of reports, for SQL reports, there's a column for repeats that's there to indicate that you have set up a report to run continuously or periodically. It could be cool to make that a sortable column so that you could get everything that's been marked as repeats to show up at the top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good one.
I noticed in the sandbox when they were still trying to get that column to work properly, there were a couple of other things that they were trying to do in that. And it did have an up-down arrow next to it. And that's when I decided, well, then that might be kind of useful.
Oh. Okay, and it doesn't here, so they did something to change the code so it doesn't let you sort it.
Right.
The modified doesn't update in production, does it? In the sandbox, I haven't tried it.
I think they fixed that. That might have been the thing that was broken before.
Because I've modified any number of reports since the point release, and they never show up.
Yeah, and that really would be useful because then you could sort and get all of your modified reports at the top.
Yeah, it's tremendously helpful.
The reports yeah, definitely. The reports that I have here in the Waldo Sandbox are, some of these go back to 2009, I think. And it would be so much nicer to be able to just have everything updated. You know, there are a lot of them that look alike too, and that's partly because not only do some of you use the Waldo Sandbox to test some of your reports, so does Libline. So, and the other thing that I've done in several cases is that I'll use a specific report and just slightly modify it, but I don't create a new report based on it. I just modify it, and I don't have any, I don't have any way of knowing what it was that I last modified it until I look at the report itself. Okay, those are all good ideas. Let me go back over here. I noticed, Ben, that you had enhancements and a question mark, and I didn't have our list of enhancements up here like I did because I rearranged this page a little bit. But if you go down, I do have the enhancements here. So those that you just mentioned, Ben, I'll make sure to put on here. And then if there's some that you want to report as bugs and they'll come back with their enhancements, I would recommend doing that too.
Thanks. That was actually a poorly timed joke. You happened to mention that your cat wanted something, but you didn't know what.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I was too focused on something else.
But thanks for listing the enhancements. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are several things here. I'll have to listen to this again because I'm not good at taking notes while I'm trying to talk and move things around and everything. But I'll add those in. And if you don't see them there, Ben, you can just go ahead and add them yourself if you'd like. The next thing that I have on the agenda is new system preferences. And last week, or the last time we met, which was more than last week, unfortunately, I asked if you would like to see that list because in previous version changes, I tried to keep up with that to make sure you knew what all the new system preferences were, what the new permissions were, et cetera. And I realized that after I found some things that I didn't really know what they were, that it might be useful to go through what some of, or at least to show you what the new system preferences are. I had ambitions to go in and to try and identify what the default value was for all of these. And after I saw how many there were, I just sort of gave up. I approached this from 2 different angles, so there may be things on this list that have been in the software since 5.20, which some of you went to and some of you didn't go to. So some of these may be new to different people. There are a few things that have that I found by looking back at the comparison of system preferences in the LAK code line versus the LLK line. And I then went through the release notes looking for the occurrence of syspref throughout that to try and make sure that I found all of the different new enhanced or the new system preferences. So hopefully these are all going to be things that are there. The big thing on all of these is if you didn't know that they were there and the functionality hasn't changed at all, that's great. If they are new in system preferences and you notice that it's something that maybe isn't working like you thought it was supposed to be from the back version, it is something that is something that you might want to look at in a little bit more detail. The other thing I was going to add in here is where in the documentation you can find a description of some of these. And that one, when I started trying to go through the documentation, it would be in a couple of two of the manuals for sure, the user manual and also the super librarian manual. And I just sort of ran out of time. So I figured this is at least a start. It's something that can get you a little bit going. Okay, now I didn't do a lot of fancy stuff. I just put these in a table. And basically the first column is the grouping that you'll find this under in the system preferences. And the second is the actual preference name. And the third column is the description that's on the system preference page. If you do not have, actually I should start this differently. This AC branch map was added in here because of South Central. And it's intended for a little bit different setup than what those of you with branches are set up as. So this is something I just wanted to let you know it's there. It's not something you really need to be concerned with. I think that in most cases where there are branch libraries in the Waldo libraries, that it's not like you're a completely independent branch miles away from the main library and you handle your own acquisitions. I think that you may have your own acquisitions that's going on, but you have your acquisition software set up so that you have funds that are allocated to certain branches rather than having a more complicated setup. Okay, so that's something that, even though it appears in here, it's not something that's probably going to be all that necessary for you to look at. The validate coda bar is one that is a possible one if you choose to use it. But what this will do is it will force the system to validate any coda bar or any barcode number that you scan for both items and patrons. So it's something that if you choose to use it, that's great, you can use it. If you're not that concerned about whether or not the barcodes are correct or not, you can leave that one turned off. I think this one is turned off when the software was installed, so you only really need to go look at it if you want to turn it on. There are a couple of cataloging system preferences. This Marked Default BERT and the BERT Auto. Those I would suggest looking, if you're using the batch edit of records, that you would look at the documentation on that. There are several in circulation that I found, and some of these, like allow all note deletion, some of these apply only to the multi-library. Okay, I should probably change that so we don't have patrons, but just patrons. Allow any library to delete the patron is for multi-library use only, again, like South Central. This one kind of took me by surprise, the browse increment on check-in. If you recall, that was one of the enhancements that Waldo funded. And when it was added in, it was just added in and it just worked. Well, evidently South Central didn't like that it just worked, and they wanted to have an option of either using the browse increment or using the software the way that it used to be, where you had to have a pseudo patron set up and then check items out to that patron to do the browse incrementing. So there is a system preference for that. If you are expecting it to do the trigger browse count, make sure you check this one to make sure it's set the way you want it to work. The system preference, when you look at it, it will be pretty obvious. I think it's a yes or a no one. And if you want it to do the browse, you say yes. And if you don't want it, you say no. There are several in here that I noticed that are multi-library only, so I'm going to sort of go completely by that. And this, some of these were in, like I said, in 5.20. Okay, there's another multi-library one, multi-library. There is a one that you can use, OPAC fine, no renewals. If you want a fine limit above which the user can't renew an item, you can enter that dollar amount into this field, and if they have fines that have accumulated up to or to that number, they won't be able to renew the book. That might be something you would want to think through a little bit, because if you tell your patrons they can renew all of their books even if they're overdue, they might not realize that if you charge fines, that this might be something that would affect them. Okay, I'm not going to comment on all of these, only the ones that at least I wasn't aware of. The next two here, the show holds range and the show checkouts range, are two new fields that you can use that sort of works with anonymization, but it's, you know, it really isn't. You can specify in each of these how you want the display for the particular holds or checkouts to show up. So in the show holds range, you can identify the hold history in the staff view and the patron view separately. So if you want the staff to view something for a whole year before it's no longer viewable, you would put in the number 365. If you want it to be basically forever, let's see, I have the words covered here, so I cannot read it all. The first value is the staff, the second is the patron view. No value will show all history. So in the example down here, if there is a comma and a 0, that means staff can view all history, patron can view none. Okay, so so that's something that you might want to consider. Holds might not be the option or the option that is most critical to you. It may be the checkout ranges. And in that case, you identify a time range. You can do like 2 weeks. So you can do an integer from 1 to 199, a space, and then the interval, which is the same values that you would use in setting up your policies. When you don't put any value in, it will show everything. So that might be another piece for those. Well, like for Hartford, you anonymize or try to anonymize daily. So that's something that you might want to consider adding in there as an extra fail-safe. Okay, not going to talk about the SIP or the talking text. There is a community moderation that you can have in there. That one, again, was primarily entered in here for the public library consortiums. There has been, again, in the enhanced contents, the EBSCON content providers. So if you set up, if you have a license to use the EBSCO databases, you can set it up so that the searching can be done through the catalog, and you can also identify what your different content providers are. So if you have business content providers, you can set those up, and the place where those get set up, I believe, is in the discovery layer. Also, there's index data. The logs, those are just sort of there. My guess is that you probably don't change your log settings very often. And if you only suspect, or if only you want to gather statistics about different logs, would you want to go in and set those on? Let's see, there are a whole bunch of discovery layer ones. And there was one that I found that I just sort of looked at that, and when I saw where it was located, I went, huh? But it's this one called Extended Title Subfields. And this one is under Legacy OPAC. Now, LibLime has been telling us for years that they're going to take out all of the Legacy OPAC pieces. And from looking at the permissions, I saw that that definitely was something that they are doing, because they're taking out specific permissions for some of the legacy OPAC. But this extended title subfields will allow you to identify which subfields you're going to display when you want the full form of the title displayed. There is a default that is in there, and if you look at this system preference, actually the way I found it is I searched for it and then I looked to see where it was in the group. You can choose. There is a default. I don't have that memorized. You can look at it easily enough in the system preference itself. And if you want to change it, you can do that. Okay, there are a few patron changes. Those are some of those we've had since 5.20. This one, this minimum issue history interval, this is another one that might be another backup kind of method for patron anonymization. And this identifies the number of days that you would retain the record of the patron to whom an item was most recently checked out. Ben, I'm not sure, have you been aware of this one and the other one that I mentioned?
The patron details timeout? The minimum issue history interval.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't aware of that, but we finally managed to get a cron job set up to delete completed circ transactions every single night. So the functionality, the function that I've been doing every single day, logging in, clearing the circ history from the day before, and not clicking the button that says delete all old patron records, which was 3 seconds of terror every single day.
Yeah.
We're done. We're all set. We did some testing in the sandbox to make sure that it was going to work properly. We did a little bit of troubleshooting and fixing, and now it's up and running. Okay, and I think we're the first ones to do that. I don't think anybody else has set that up yet. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think you're correct on that.
All right.
I noticed your support center ticket on that and kept track of it for a while, and then figured that you got it taken care of.
Yeah, that got closed today. One of the other things that we had done earlier was I had Jim switch off the display of the box when patrons log in. When you go to the dashboard, there's got a little box that says, here's my circulation history. And I had him switch off the display of that. So while we were still trying to get all this work done, I didn't want people to, build expectations that now they can go back and look at their reading history. So I had that suppressed.
Good.
What kinds of things did you have to fix? We just turned that cron job on in our sandbox.
Like just I'd have to go back and take a look at the tickets to get an idea of what's been changed. But I don't think it was necessarily anything that we had to change on our part. I think it was more along the lines of the folks at LibLime taking a look at it and saying, oh, okay, we need to fix this one little thing. And they did.
Okay.
They took care of it.
Okay.
They insisted quite a bit that we go in and we take a look at the roles that we'd assigned to different users, because there is a way that you can get, say, faculty to retain their history, or staff to retain their history. We decided that no, we want to keep with the way that we had it before and just clear every single transaction.
Yeah. I delayed because I wanted them to update the data in our sandbox so we could, compare one-to-one, but they won't do that.
That was an interesting conversation, Steve, and I sort of chuckled each time there was a back and forth between you and Jatika.
Yeah. So if you've got it working all right, then I'm just going to trust that it's going to do what we want it to and have them turn it on in production. Thanks.
Yeah. No problem. There are a couple of things that I should point out. We've had a long-standing problem with the fact that once you anonymize a circ transaction, the connection in the stats changes. If you are retaining completed circ transactions, you can still see a statistical link between the kind of patron and the kind of item that gets checked out, right? So if you're really keen on knowing how many faculty members have been checking out your laptops, know that if you clear your circ history, that link breaks. And I bring it up every couple of years. I've been bringing it up for about, literally for 10 years now. But it's still an issue. The other thing is, and this is really weird, if you can go in and switch on retention of your circ history yourself, and that's fine, and it'll retain it. But the moment that you go in and say, okay, I don't want to record my circ history anymore, it wipes out the older circ history too, right? So you can't keep your circ history just for that one period of time where you had it switched on and then switch it back off again. It all gets wiped out.
Yeah. We've never let patrons turn that on. It's never even shown up as an option for them. So I'm not worried about that one. We always went in and we were perfectly satisfied with the manual anonymization, except for, as you mentioned, the possibility that we could delete patron records by accident.
It really is. It really was scary.
Yeah.
We have we don't delete patron records because we've had too many instances where somebody who graduated 10 years ago comes back as a grad student, and then we'd have to put it back in, and we're going to lose their transaction stuff, and we're going to we're concerned about losing billing history and stuff. We've never deleted any patron records, and this includes the stuff that we've migrated into CULA. So it's more than just the 10 years. Now we're talking about the years that we were in Voyager and the years that we were in the system before Voyager as well. So I have gotten a couple
Hmm.
of complaints from the kind folks at LibLime saying, hey, about the amount of data that you guys are retaining, do you really need that? But no, we're keeping it.
Yeah, I'd be interested in discussing that with you at a later date. We're going long on this, but the we are concerned about retaining patron records after they are no longer of any real use to us. Um, and just having it, just in case they come back, seems like it may not be a good enough reason to justify it to accreditors or whatever.
That's a great question to explore.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll keep moving on. Has anybody turned the sound on in their staff client? I have, and sometimes it startles me at how loud it is. It's because I have my volume on my speakers set up to the maximum, but I can verify that this one definitely does work. Okay, in the acquisitions module itself, when you go into acquisitions, there is a set of system preferences that are for acquisitions. And when I was going through the release notes, I discovered that there are a couple of system preferences within acquisitions that you might want to be aware of, because whatever it is set at the introduction of this preference, it will stay that way unless you go in and change it. So there are two. The first one is default create on receipt. And if you always tell the system that you want to create item records when you receive an item, you can actually go in and tell it to do that, so you don't have to remember to click it when you set up your purchase order lines. It's just one way to do that very easily. But if you do that, you'll have to remember to scan the barcode each time. The second one is a default search type. So for a Z3950 search, right now the default search type is set to title. If you would prefer to have it search for ISBN or ISSN or one of the other search types that you can select, you can do that in the defaults within acquisitions. And that's something that's not really obvious if you don't know about them. So now you know about them. There were some system preferences that were removed, some that I was able to identify what group they were in, but there were a whole lot that I couldn't define or figure out which group they were in, so I just listed them here. You can tell most of them have something to do with the legacy OPAC. Also, spine labels have changed, so if you use spine labels, I'm sure you've already figured that out. Yes, Slim is gone. Okay, so I'm going to send this out after the meeting so that you all have a copy of this. As you know, I can't add things to our wiki at this point because I'm not quite sure why I can't do it, but I can't. So let me go back to the agenda. And as you can see, I also wanted to let you know what the new granular permissions are. But with your assent, I'm going to skip that one for this week. That'll be our starting point next week. But there are a couple of things that I wanted to make sure that you knew about before we ended today. And going through the release notes looking for system preference things, I found a couple of other things that I know I haven't told you about before because I have skipped over them in the past as I've been reading through the release notes. You know that you can set your whole policies for different item types and for patron types, etc. But there is also another way that you can set hold policies for specific titles. And you do that in the 942 subfield R. And let me just come in here, search the catalog for, just do my normal one here. And I'm just pulling up a record, doesn't matter which record it is, but in the 942 field, which I don't have in this record, come down here. Okay, 942 subfield R gives us some options. And in our options, we can set this so that there are no holds allowed at all on this particular title, this one individual title, regardless of what the system is set up to do. You can set it so there are only item holds, so you only have title holds, or so that you can do both. Now, where I see this as maybe being something that might be useful in your libraries is if you have an item that's been locally created. It's something that one of your professors has written or produced or whatever, and they want to include it in the library, but they only want it for in-library use only. And they don't, they only want, you know, their conditions that they want to set on it. You can actually override your normal hold policy on a title basis, on a title by title basis, by using this particular option. It applies to the title itself. So if you want to make changes to specific items, you would have to do that in your item policies. But I thought this was something cool and I hadn't seen it before. Is this something that's new to all of you as well, or is it something that you all had figured out and I didn't even know that it was there? Is this something that you think that you would want to use?
Hi, Becky.
Yeah.
This isn't something that we have to fill in every single time, right?
No, only if you want to have a specific policy on a specific title.
That's good to know. Thanks.
Yeah. When I lived in South Dakota and worked at the state library there was a title that always got stolen, and it was called Sundancing on the Rosebud, and it was about the sundancing ceremony that was performed at the Rosebud Indian Reservation. And every time that we replaced it, it got stolen again. And it became an expensive book. This was back in the 80s, so it was like a $200 book that we didn't have a reason to keep it in the reference collection, so it was in the circulating collection, and it circulated. So that's the one that I would think of using this, where I would allow no holds, so I knew exactly who had that item when it was out, so I'd know who to bill. I don't know, I thought that was kind of a cool thing that I saw. And if you come up with any examples, you might want to share them on the mailing list and let people know how you're using it. It's just something that I thought was kind of cool. The other thing that I thought was kind of cool that I found in the system, or in the release notes, is that you can now set up facets for your authority RCN values. So as you know, when you go to your topic, Let me get out of this. And let me just go back to my index page. Okay. Okay, I see it. This is something new to me too, obviously. Now it should let me out of it. There we go. And now let me go back. I am sorry, I'm just not paying attention to what I'm doing here. Okay. When we come over here to our topic, if we were to limit by this is actually going to the subject headings, to the 650 subfield A. And in our authority records, we have ways to, I'm sorry, there are, this might help if I find this here. There we go. This is the one. Let me increase this a little bit. Okay, so in the new RCN Aware topic index, it includes all 650 subfields. So as I was mentioning before, the existing topic index only has a 650 subfield A. These new facets are redundant with the existing facets like topic facet and genre facet, but with the RCN-based ones, you can become more detailed. So this particular fix, or actually it's an enhancement in the system, gives you the list of what the new faceting indexes are that are automatic. These are automatically created. You would just have to add them into your search facet system preference. And the new indexes include author, RCN facet, series, title, RCN facet, uniform title, topic, RCN facet, geo, RCN facet, etc. I'm not going to repeat all of them. So there's also an example of what the syntax should be like. So if you are actively using authorities and are managing your authority records, you can set this up. You can also set this up if you are not actively managing the authority records. You can still set up these facets, because whatever is in the authority records created for your database, you'll be able to include those into the facets. Ben, I'm going to pick on you again. Is this something that you had been aware of?
I remember seeing it a little while ago. We were still wrestling with some of the other stuff, so I haven't really explored it too much.
Okay.
Uniform title looks kind of interesting. I mean, it was created for, you know, one of the geospatial federal agencies. So, I mean, they're really key on some of the stuff that we would never ever use, but I think it's definitely worth looking into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can set a couple of these up in the Waldo sandbox if you'd like, so that hoping that I can remember what some of my different headings are in there, so that you can at least look at it and see what it brings up compared to what the other ones are.
Thanks.
But that's something that I think maybe a lot of you might be wanting to look at. You know, just the fact that knowing that you're only browsing through the 650 subfield A's when you're looking at your facets would lead you to think, oh, I might want to do something a little bit more detailed on that. So I'll see what I can get set up, and maybe next week I'll be able to show a couple of things on that. Okay, the last thing, since, wow, we're already over by 3 minutes. Next week we're going to meet again. That's getting us back on our normal regular schedule. And next week we're going to try something a little bit different. For a while, Ben has been offering to show us the work that they've done on the discovery layer at the University of Hartford. And he's agreed that he will do that next week for us. So we will be meeting next week. We'll have maybe a couple of things, definitely the granular permissions, but that won't take too long. And we'll turn Ben loose on showing us what they've done at the University of Hartford. I will let you know that Patrick and John are going to join us for next week's meeting. And one thing that we have had on our enhancement list for forever, I think, ever since University of Hartford started doing modification of their discovery layer, is to have LibLime add in the features that have been figured out by one of our own and have it as part of the generic programming that comes with the software. So what we're trying to, what Ben and I have strategized a little bit on is, in order to make it maybe a little bit more impactful for John and Patrick in particular, that we might be asking you throughout the course of the meeting or at the end of the meeting which of the features you might be most interested in seeing added into the LibLime release version. So Ben, do you want to talk a little bit about what you are thinking about doing for next week in terms of identifying the the changes?
Yes, I'm going to lead with this. Keep your comments short because I've got 12 things already that I've written down to demonstrate, and we only have an hour. So of the things that I have written down is the new browse shell functionality that we came up with to manage it. We put the page navigation at the top of the search results, the redesigned date widget that we have in our facets list, the button that I like to call the more with an or in facets as well. And oh, Stephen, yes, I am definitely going to write this up and send it out before the meeting. Oh, the regex in the search bar to remove some of the characters that break ordinary searches. The completely redesigned reserves module. The tiered subject searching in bib details that is based on text searches, not the authority record number. Well, on and on and on. Anyways.
Yeah, and if we don't get to the point of being able to have you say we want A, B, C, and D, but we don't care about E, we'll figure out a way to let John and Patrick know that that will be coming, so that they will have something to, so Patrick will have something to go back to Clay with. I talked with Ben a little bit, and actually the best thing that we could do is make sure that we get the librarian input into how this needs to look for our patrons, rather than, it would be great if we had a librarian computer programmer clone somewhere that was half Clay and half one of us. But since we don't have that, we're going to try and create one artificially. So that's what we will be looking at next week. And there was one addition that is added to the agenda here under Other. And Stephen, you want to take it for the staff client accessibility issue?
Yeah, it's just that we recently, I guess, actually not all that recently, it's been over a year now, had a requirement placed by the state and implemented by the college that all software has to go through compliance checking for both security and accessibility. And so our basically our disability office does testing, and there's no problem with the OPAC that they could see, but they weren't even able to log in to the staff client. And so they were willing to, give it a pass for now, but obviously if we ever had somebody who needed some sort of an accommodation on our staff, that would be a problem. And I'm wondering if that's a concern for anybody else.
Stephen, do you know which disabilities or what they were specifically looking for? Was it for the blind, for other kind of disabilities?
I think they were using screen reader software at the time, okay. And they did communicate that to Jane, and she replied that basically they have a bunch of different people working on that, and they don't consider accessibility when they're doing their design or development.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Has that come up for anybody else?
We're going to, once we finish doing the last little bits of enhancement work that we have going right now in the pipeline, we're going to start looking at our public side and making sure that it is that it meets accessibility standards. I think that LibLine has probably done an awful lot of work in order to make, and correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, in order to make the DL, standardized as far as universal access. But we have done so much work replacing their code that I'm not entirely sure that we could say the same thing about Hartford side.
Yeah, and Stephen, just so you know, I did ask Patrick about accessibility just in general a few weeks ago, and I can't remember his exact words, but it was sort of like if you could imagine someone slowly melting down, that might be a good visual that you could think of. I think that I'm not sure that there's any library system out there that would pass the staff side accessibility because, well, partly because you always have to log in, and that's going to be a breaker pretty much with any system that's out there. Screen readers don't do a very good job of reading windows within windows, I think. They do fine at text, but it's some of the other pieces that are there. So I don't know, it'd be interesting to find out if the discovery services like EBSCO and ProQuest, if they've addressed the kinds of issues that they run into. You know, because when you sign into those, if you want to limit down to a specific database, you have to choose from a whole list of things that are there. And I just wonder how that works with accessibility standards. Or if it
they do have their VPATs, their reports out there, and we've gone through, actually, I think that the EBSCO host platform has gone through multiple testing because they have this set up so that they do it for each renewal, which is a nightmare, but that's another topic.
Yeah.
But at any rate, it's passed every time.
Okay. So somewhere there are standards written for that kind of activity. Yeah, well, it'd be interesting if that question came up next week too, with Patrick on the line. Okay, so we are considerably over our time right now. So we will, excuse me, meet again next week. Watch for Ben's message to the mailing list, and I'll get the agenda out there, and we'll hopefully get to listen mostly next week. Thank you all. We'll meet again next week. Oh, one thing before we all go. I mentioned earlier that I had reorganized this page a little bit. If you look, I put headings in that are in green. So we've got our agenda section, our connection, documentation links, our enhancements, followed by URLs, which gets you the URLs into the Waldo Sandbox and the credentials, as well as how your URL is constructed for getting into your production and sandbox system, and then ending with previous weeks. So that is there. I'll try and get some kind of either go to the top or an outline at the top so that you can go from one section to another easily. But for right now, it's just scrolling. So we'll see each other next week as we usually do. And until then, have a good week. Thank you all.
Thanks. And that looks great. Thanks for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome.